Are there lessons that can be learned from those that have innovated before us? You bet. This is the first in a series of interviews with individuals who created truly killer innovations that changed the world. This podcast is an interview I did with David Cochran. David was the product manager of the calculator that literally changed the world. The very first scientific calculator, the HP 35, released in 1972. During this interview, David shares a lot of funny anecdotes and stories about his experience with Bill Hewlett and David Packard, along with stories about other team members, including Steve Wozniak. Enjoy.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
What was the unique conditions that allowed the HP 35 to come into existence?
Within HP, at that particular time, and I'm not sure how it fits into the context of the rest of the technology companies, but within HP, we had something very going on that was extremely unique. One, Packard was away in Washington. So, I mean, this had an impact because now Hewlett was running the company. Secondly, Hewlett was just, he was so intense about wanting the calculating power that he had on his desk that was in the 9100. He was so, I use the word intense. He would come by every couple of weeks and he'd walk through the labs, and management by walking and wandering around, but he'd walk through the labs and he'd ask me, because I was working on algorithms and I was looking for architecture, what technology that would fit within an architecture structure that could put it in the shirt pocket. So he was just, really, and there was one other thing, and Barney Oliver was away at SETI. He had taken a year's leave of absence to work on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence down at NASA Ames, and so he wasn't there, being the alter ego and bugging us and telling us, why don't we do this or that? He wasn't telling us, nobody was telling us how to do the design. So it was at HP, all my career at HP, it was perhaps the epitome of a perfect storm of goodness.
You had enough management out of the way.
And yet, what we got from Hewlett, though, was his blessing for whatever we wanted to do. Now, we didn't have a budget on this thing because we essentially used the ongoing lab budget, just the day-to-day budget. So we got, I think there was, we saw them there, 11. There was probably 18 engineers from HP Labs that were working on aspects of it, but and everybody was excited. And yet we'd go down to the model shop and we want something made, or we want a mock-up done. And the industrial design group was doing mock-ups and so on. And so they would do whatever, if it was for the Hewlett calculator, pocket calculator, then everybody was excited about it. So it was perfect. And we could get help from wherever.
When you think back to how did the project actually get started? I mean, was it really just, Bill coming around saying, take this, put it in my pocket, which is kind of the folklore story of the HP 35.
And that's exactly how it got started, because he would get sawed off at us. And because we'd say, well, we don't have a technology. And mostly he was talking to me or Tom Whitney. And he'd say, Tom, can't you get Dave to find something? Can't you, you guys should be working on this. And Tom would come over and lean on me, and I say, yeah, look, if there's no technology, I can't figure out how to get this much, it's putting 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. And if you can't, just can't figure out how to do it. And, and I think I told you the story about the desktop calculator that when we got it all done, and Hewlett wanted it to fit in the secretarial slot on his desk, and so we went over there and we tried it out, and it wouldn't fit. And at that time, we called a carpenter shop and got them to make his desk a little bit larger, about 1/8 of an inch larger, and so it would slide in the secretarial slot. And so we thought that we were going to have to get hold of Hewlett's tailor and get his pockets made a little larger. And
so you actually got his desk modified in order to fit the calculator into the desk.
Yeah. Now, and we think, there's speculation, we think that he never knew. But then some people have said, yes, he knew, and he just didn't want to let on because it was a big joke. But that was fun. But so he would come over, and at that time, the only high-density integrated circuit technology that had any chance was the metal oxide semiconductor, MOS, because bipolar was just way too much power, and it just wasn't efficient in space. So he got kind of discouraged with us. And so even though he kept coming around and bugging us, he went to the Industrial Design Group, and he says, okay, I'm going to have them make a design of what I want. The guts be damned. And so he made the mock-up of the thing, and the outside shape and so on, and started putting keys on it. And because he knew all the functionality, because it had to have all the functionality of what was in the desktop. And so we kibitz on that because the thing was keyboards up to that time, and if you look at old typewriters and so on, the key filled the whole slot in between the keys. So you had, it's like present keyboards on your laptop. Well, somebody I guess it was Al Anhelder in Industrial Design Group, said, we don't need a key that fills the whole slot. We just need, almost a little, the size of a pencil eraser. And that leaves space between keys, because otherwise, the first keyboard they did, you press one and three of them would, you had the adjacent. And I think Barney Oliver was around at that time because Barney Oliver had the biggest fingers you ever saw. And so it was the Barney Oliver test. Could Barney Oliver press one key and not have it stutter and enter 3 digits or whatever? So all of that was going on the sidelines, and it was just a terrific time.
So Bill actually went and had the model done.
Oh yeah,
and then said, "Make the guts fit in the model."
Oh yeah, and we knew it, and we kept trying to slow those guys down. We don't want to come on, because that puts more pressure on us. But it was one of those kind of things.
If I recall back to the story on the calculator, though, there was all the market research was done, and the marketing department came back and said, "No, there's no market for this thing."
That when, like I said, for about 2 years. We finished the desktop calculator. I think I was in the late 60s, 66, 67, something like that. And then Hewlett got this idea. He wanted something that fit in his pocket. And so for about 2 years then, we were looking for a technology. I kept saying, hey, there wasn't an integrated circuit. It had to be an integrated circuit technology. And if you look at the desktop calculator, it was discrete integrated circuits. So it needed to be, which are just a few gates at a time and so on. And here we needed something with thousands of gates, but at that time, so we kept looking and looking, and I was evaluating other people's designs and 4-function calculators and anything I'd heard about in the literature and so on. And so then when we finally found something that looked like it would fit, and we actually found it at Fairchild, and they had an architecture that looked like it would fit. See, we knew the algorithms. I knew the algorithms, and it's almost like design. You've got software, and think of an operating system and say, okay, I've got this operating system. Now, what kind of hardware fits that operating system. Rather than the old way was, here we have a microprocessor hardware, now design an operating system for it. So we were doing it backwards. We were starting with the algorithms. Here's what we wanted that functionality inside the machine to do, and now what hardware would support that. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, the first time that was done. And so I scoped it out, and it took a couple of weeks for a redesign of what I saw at Fairchild, and I went to my boss, Tom Whitney, and he went to Paul Stoff. And, hey, we can do it. Dave thinks we can do it. Hey, here's the size, and we can do this maybe in 4 or 5 chips, and so on. And oh, guys, now take it to Hewlett. He'll get all excited and so on. We took it to Hewlett, and he says, oh, well, gee, how much is this going to cost? And I said, about $1 million to develop it. Oh, now, remember, Packard was away. Hewlett had nobody to talk to and say, is this a good idea or not? Packard would make a decision just like that and say, oh, hey, sounds good, let's run with it. Hewlett says, well, I've got my friends over at SRI, and they do this kind of investigations, and let me go contact them and see if a scientific pocket calculator, if there's a market for it. So it wasn't done within the company; it was done outside the company, and he really wanted some alter ego to make that decision.
So kind of looking for that validation.
Exactly, and so they kept stalling, and it was a guy. Last name was Calhoun. I forget his first name, but he came back and did a presentation about 3 months later, and said, we've run focus groups, we've done this and done that, and nobody knows what we're talking about. They say, 4-function machine, it's got to be under $100. But for scientific, mathematical, 10-digit accuracy, but no. So you can charge whatever you want on that. So that was no validation at all. So Hewlett was still kind of nervous. In the meantime, we've been plowing ahead.
So the project started for the HP 35 in, 1968?
No, it started, the actual, where we said, yes, we have a design and we can move forward, was in 70.
Okay. And when was this model built that Dave ran?
It was probably by June of 70, Hewlett had his mock-up pretty well roughed out. And so then when we said, yes, we can do it, then everything started to gel. And there were people in the meantime that were working on the little cricket feel for the switches and so on, but we didn't have anybody working on a power supply. There was some display work going on, but not seriously.
So the product's getting ready to be launched. Because given that at that time HP's total product line was in test and measurements instruments, and now you're building a consumer product, first consumer product to come from HP.
But it wasn't recognized as a consumer product by us. We thought, because everybody started clamoring for, like I mentioned, if the guy at the next bench thought it was great and he wanted one, then it was going to be popular. And so, and this is where, Hewlett was starting to panic, and he says, gee, how are we going to sell this? How many are we going to make? Is anybody going to want this? How does it fit into the rest of our product line, and so on? So they, and the first thing they did, I think, was about September of 71, that we got 10 models done, something like that actually would function. And we took them to, like I said at the commemoration, we took one to Fred Terman, one to Alvarez over in Berkeley, one to Hofstadter, another to Panofsky. These are scientists and engineers in the area. And we got really different reactions from all of them. Panofsky said, well, I wouldn't buy one of these. If you're giving it to me, it's fine. I'll take it. Fred Terman, Dean Terman, really was so impressed, and he kept looking for the cable and, how's it doing all this? And he entered some numbers and so on. And he was just really impressed. So we had, but was it just was it for the scientific gadfly? Was it I got an iPod, was it just, or was it something that people really wanted and would pay for? And so they started, early 72, they started producing them, and we had production problems and so on. The display didn't work quite right and so on. But we started producing them, and they started selling them through the normal sales channels. In other words, the salesman would have one in his pocket, and he'd make his calls. Well, that actually had a reverse effect, because what happened was the people he was calling on got so interested in that they didn't buy anything else. and then the salesman didn't have enough of them to supply the demand that he's having through his buddies and his sales contacts. When he, think of down in Las Cruces, New Mexico, that he goes to Alamogordo and is showing these things around, and everybody's clamoring around. And the heck with the rest of the instrumentation. They want to know.
They want their calculator.
Yeah, how can I get one of those calculators? Oh, yeah. And how much are they? $395. And that was the other thing. Now, how do we determine the price? And everybody used to ask, how does HP determine its price? Well, when there's no competition, you multiply by pi. You take the material list. No overhead, no labor, nothing. Just take the material list, multiply by pi. And
that's a true story.
You go back to some of the calculate, or you
take your bill of materials and you multiply it by pi.
Yes, you go back to some of the products, and I did that study once, and I took a whole bunch of products, and I found that either that you multiply by pi and it came out very close, or you multiply by E if you had competition, 2.713, and at 3.14, and so on. And you could track it by that. I mean, this is, hey.
So you had competition, you multiplied your bill of materials by E. No competition by pi. Yeah. There's a pricing strategy that's going to revolutionize the valley, I can tell.
But that, people would say, and they had all these bean counters, but the thing is that the prices were normally, what will the market bear and so on and so forth. And it was a seat of the pants thing. And this is how a lot of products were done like that. Now, yeah, HP is very different from that. But that, and essentially it came out at $395. It should have charged $400, but we can't go over that $400, so we'll charge $395. And so it's. So
you started. So originally it was the HP sales reps, but then we always hear the stories about, all of a sudden sales take off, production backlogs, and it was like months of trying to get caught up on demand.
Then because of the, people just started saying, wait a minute, selling it through our salespeople, there seems to be a big demand there, and we're not reaching, the market. How about the college student or the college professor? How do we reach those markets? Our sales, the HP sales team, is calling on scientists and engineers, and that's, if we're really going to, it looks like these are attractive to other aspects of society. How are we going to do that? And then you got this problem with if one student has an HP calculator, do you allow him to have it during the test? Now, even doing homework, does he have an advantage over other students? If one student in the class has it, should all the students, and so on? So that became a big problem. And then I'm not sure who started reading Women's Wear Daily. That was that's Macy's on the main floor. That gives you the high spots of Women's Wear Daily. Was I think it was a weekly or monthly publication that told you all you needed to know about merchandising in the Macy's and the Emporiums and so on of the world. So, and somebody got us into Macy's, and they put the calculators. And I used to know this. It was something like $3,000 per square foot per year was the sales on the main floor, and on the third floor it was only $1,000 per square foot. And that's how you measure things, and then you put them in the aisle. And so they had calculators in the aisle, and this is, God, it was awfully hard to even keep the stock going, because once you open that door into the merchandising, the standard merchandising channels and so on, it just never closed.
With the launch of the calculator, what was kind of, Bill and Day's view now? They've kind of launched this monster.
Well, remember that Dave Packard was still in Washington and didn't come back until after that. And after the launch of the calculator, the first introduction and so on, there was still some hiccups, like I said. The display chip had to be redesigned. We ran out of production very quickly and had to authorize increased production. The molds started falling apart. It was only set up for about 100,000 run, and so beyond that, so all the tooling was set up on that, and then they started saying, well, we could really capitalize on this by manufacturing them in Singapore. So the whole operation then, manufacturing operation, was converted over and moved over to Singapore. And the price was pretty stable for a while. And so that made HP a lot of money.
The product comes out, and particularly when you think about something as significant as the HP 35 has had on just everybody. I mean, not just at HP, but everybody could always have their HP calculator story. What happened with the team? Because, you and I've talked with other members of the team, and everybody kind of, after the 35, it's kind of like, what do you do next for the Encore after you do something as significant as the HP 35?
Some of the people, a few like Chung Tung, went with the calculator division. I didn't want to move to Corvallis, and I, there was nothing anticlimactical for me to do. I mean, what do you do as a follow-on? And I had difficulty influencing. You give the baby away and somebody's dressing it differently than you would, and so on and so forth. And so, then I pulled off. I went into semiconductors and was working on the next generation semiconductors, which I thought was CMOS, and it was only going to be used for storage in the calculator, but then later became pervasive. But anyhow, and my story is not unique. And Francais Rodet did something else, and all of us did something else, more or less. I think that's one of it can't continue. There's something about having that. You look at wartime stories of people that developed things during the war, and then afterward they all broke apart. Mm-hmm. So you do it right. There was interest and enthusiasm and everything, and after it's completed, the war is finished or whatever, then everybody kind of goes their separate ways, and it just happens.
The HP 35 just got awarded the IEEE award for one of being leading innovation. So, your thoughts on being part of that team and receiving the IEEE award?
Well, I was selfish in that I felt that it deserved it. When I look at look back on it, when you've mentioned earlier, what did we think at the time when we had developed the HP 35? And even though we thought it was significant, we didn't think it was as significant as looking back on it, we think of it now, because some people have said, well, it was the start of everything, miniature and integrated, and gave you this instant ability to do all this mathematical calculations and such. And so it was a forerunner for everything that we're doing today. But at the time, it was a project, and it was a fun project. And I'd been on a couple of other projects, but they weren't quite as fun. This one was so much more fun because it involved so many different disciplines and interests in technology, and it had this cast of thousands. It probably touched more than 100 people during the development. I mean, from the work done in the model shop and so on within HP, of just doing little parts of it. And so it was very significant. And so I felt that it deserved to be recognized by the IEEE. And so I enjoyed the notoriety of when we first developed it. And I remember going to a press conference with Bill Hewlett and up at the up in San Francisco, and so I wanted to recapture some of that, and could I by having this commemoration, and so I helped put the plan together, or the application together, and sent it off to the IEEE and so on. So I'm very gratified, and really was also enjoyed having the people that were instrumental in the development there. And by the way, I finally picked up my miniature of the IEEE award.
The plaque.
I got it in the back of my trunk. I'm carrying it around and showing to anybody that wants to see. Maybe they'll buy me a few drinks or whatever. So it's
call up Steve. Maybe Steve can pop you for a drink.
Come on out. I'll open my trunk and show it to you. But it's really great to be recognized, and it's interesting that even though we have the technology that's staring us right in front of, we got a couple of laptops and everything, that the HP 35 is very much recognized as part of that technology, breakthroughs and innovation. And I think it's just like I said, it was a perfect storm, and it was a perfect storm of innovation coming together, of technologies being ready at the appropriate time. Xerox PARC is full of things that were maybe ahead of their time or late, and just weren't quite ready. And the HP 35 was at a crossroads of technology, and and just the situation, the people being available in the company and so on, and maybe not being available, where we had more freedom than normal and so on. It was really good.
So now that you've looked back, I mean, you've had a phenomenal career at HP, the HP 35. You've gone on to do other things. When you think about like the new engineers coming out of school who want to kind of do their own, everybody wants to go off and do kind of that in their career, at least one point in their career, have a major product that has broad influence on an industry like an HP 35. What's your advice to those young engineers coming out or just getting started?
So what I would say to people, and I always say, is get your grounding in science, physics, mathematics. Don't look at the greatest whiz-bang integrated circuit or the latest software or whatever. If you're going to develop things, you want that grounding in core sciences. And then go to work for a place like HP. And HP used to say, even those that want to become an entrepreneur and be their own boss, hey, we'll train you here. And come work for us for a while and learn the ropes. And that's, look at Steve Wozniak used to work for me. And I used to pound on him about finishing school because he came to HP as a summer job when he had still, I think, a year or maybe 2 years to go. And I think he'd gone to Foothill College for a couple of years. And I say, Steve, you ought to finish up your college. Oh, yeah, well, yeah, and so on. But he was really a sharp mind, very fast microcoder. He could type, 150 words a minute. He'd sit there with his feet up on the desk and coding. And it wasn't until he became rich and famous that he went back to school and he did finally finish up. But so there's been a lot of people that started out at HP and would work for a while, and a lot of them very good brains and such, and they participated in some exciting things. but then had that inner urge to go out and do something on their own. Now, many actually offered Hewlett-Packard their invention, Trimble navigation, the GPS systems. That design was done right here in Santa Clara, in Santa Clara Agilent division now. And that was offered to Hewlett-Packard. And HP declined and said, no, we don't want to produce that type of equipment. And Charlie Trimble said, may I take it away? And I'm not sure what I heard it was that HP got 1% of the action then. But you could do that. And I don't know if HP is still doing that, but where you have an idea, because the rule is, hey, you do it on HP time from an HP idea using HP tools, it belongs to HP. And so if you do invent something, share it, and you might even get some other buddies in the lab to go with you and form companies. HP, they've spun out numerous companies. I'd say more than 100 out of HP, if not thousands.
Talk a little bit about. There's always been this, this description of the next bench kind of culture. Particularly in the early days of engineering at HP, where the engineers were designing products for people like themselves at other companies. Talk a little about the whole next bench culture.
And I mentioned that earlier, that HP 35 development, people were anxious to get on it because they wanted to be. They could see that it was going to be something, and they wanted to be a part of it, and they were anxious to use it. Heretofore, like I said, the setup in the laboratory was you had a desk, and behind it you had a bench, and I think there'd be 2 desks and 2 benches, so there'd be a couple of people with some bookcases in between, and then across the aisle you'd have the same thing. So it was kind of staggered that way, and so you were always looking over at what your buddy was doing because you were curious, and sometimes his project was more interesting than yours. And so, but sometimes you'd see things that were really exciting, and you'd say, oh gosh, yeah, I could use that right now. Can you give me a prototype, or can you, and so there was that back and forth where now the opposite, though, if you saw he was doing something and you say, oh God, who in the world wants that? Well, unfortunately, that's what I said to Steve Wozniak, you and who else wants a homebrew computer? So, yeah, I can't win them all. But the thing is that you were constantly looking at what other people were doing. There was more. There was 2 things. One, there were no walls. It was the labs just had rows of benches and desks and such, and everybody was wandering around and picking parts and so on and so forth. And secondly, there was just that much more freedom of communication, and I think that moving, and I think the laboratories now mostly are cubes and offices, right? And it's hard to get that communication and awareness of what everybody's doing, and particularly people are instant messaging somebody all over the world now. So they are communicating, and I just heard this last night on the radio. People are communicating so much through instant messaging, and all their Facebook and everything else all over the world, that they're not communicating with their kids sitting next to them eating dinner, because he's got his earphones on and he's listening to whatever. And I think the same thing holds true when you're in this group. You could be anywhere. The fact that you're sitting there with 8 other engineers means nothing, because you're not communicating with them as much as you are across the world.
So what's your favorite memory of Bill?
Of Bill Hewlett?
Yeah.
a couple of times I gave him a ride home because I lived across the street from him, and it was quite funny. He'd call up and he'd say, "Dave, can I get a ride with you?" It's not "This is Bill" or anything. It's, "Dave, can I get a ride with you tonight?" "Okay, yeah." "Was that Hewlett?" "Okay, let me call his secretary. Does Hewlett want to ride home?" "Yeah, okay, yeah." And he was just, he was, just one time, I got all kinds of memories. One time, here he was, one of the richest men in the world. Or, I don't know, he was in my estimation or something. And he was wandering around one time, and he said, "What are you looking for?" "Can't find my paycheck." What do you need a paycheck for?" "Oh, got to eat." He wanted to be just a regular guy, and I know his history. I mean, his father was dean of the medical school, and that was Stanford Medical School was in San Francisco at that time. It would never be in the country, but anyhow, so he was one of those kind of guys that was just very much down to earth, and like when he named the HP-35. We were all talking about what we should name it and so on. He said, "We'll call it the HP-35. "Why would we do that?" "Well, it's got 35 keys." He'd come up with these things that are just so obvious, and they're very homely, and just he was that kind of guy. It just never pulled rank on you or anything like that.
So what's your favorite history of David, then? What's your most...
where he left this note. These guys would come in on weekends. They could pop in at any time because it was their company. And Packard left this note, and it was down in 395 Page Mill Road. And they were building a 130 oscilloscope and a 150 oscilloscope. And somebody made a mock-up with sheet metal. And they came in on Monday morning, here's this thing all bent up. And he says, and there's a note, "Don't make things you can bend up with one hand. And do it right." And that was Packard's philosophy. And Packard came back from being Deputy Secretary of Defense. And he'd stayed out of things for all the time he was gone. Bill Hewlett was running. But when he came back, there was a mini recession going on. The company was in financial. It didn't have, they were considering layoffs, going out and borrowing money, et cetera, et cetera. And Packard walked through each of the buildings. And in a few hours' time, he knew exactly what was wrong. And he just had that eye for it. Look, your projects are taking too long to complete. You got too much inventory. You got too much raw materials. Our accounts receivables are 90 days, and our accounts payable are 30. Why are we doing this? And so on and so forth. And within 6 months, we had the balance sheet was leveled out. I mean, he just was very, very impressed. Both of them. Hewlett was an engineer's engineer, and Packard was just managed by walking around, and whereas Hewlett needed to see all the numbers. See, and that's what the difference. I mean, if Packard had been here, and he would have said, "Oh yeah, go for the calculator," whereas Hewlett said, "Wait a minute, I need somebody to tell me about it." So totally different, and got along with both of them very well.
Well, David, I thank you for your time coming in and talking to us today.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Please send your feedback. Particularly, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on doing these kinds of interviews. The objective is to give you a broader exposure to others that are out there creating killer innovations. If you found this podcast interesting and you want to connect with other innovators, join the network. There's killer innovation groups now in existence over on LinkedIn and Facebook and a variety of the social sites. Also, feel free to follow me over on Twitter. Just do a follow, Phil McKinney. Also, pay it forward. For those of you that are regular listeners of the podcast, you know that my sole objective in the podcast is to pay it forward as a return to my early mentors. And when I asked them how to pay it back, they told me later in my career to pay it forward to others. All I ask is that you pay it forward. Thanks for the time out of your busy schedule. Look forward to talking to you real soon. Bye-bye.